Українське незалежне радіо.
How are you?
Hi.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for joining me. You're an immigration lawyer in two countries, right?
Right. I'm a member of the bars of New York and California in the United States and Ontario and BC in Canada, and I do US and Canadian immigration law.
Andy Semotiuk. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah, Semotiuk. Andy in Ukrainian, I go by Andy in English. Yeah, I think you probably would know why.
Yeah, I've anglicized Danilo Terleckyj to Dan Terleckyj.
Yeah.
It suits my purposes.
Yeah, it's a hard world out there for, in the Anglo world, and each one has to figure out how they're going to cope with it. This is my way of coping. When I write books, I write Andy Semotiuk, as an author, but
Yes.
Otherwise, in English parlance, I'm Andy Semotiuk. So,
You're bilingual too, aren't you?
yes, of course, I speak Ukrainian and English.
So you've got your brain in two worlds, your worldview in two spots, and including your name.
I've tried to, get into some other languages. It's not going that very well. A little bit of Spanish, a little bit of French, Polish, Russian, all that. But I'm just not conversant in any of them.
What do the Ukrainians say? Чим більше мов, тим більше людина, right? The more languages you know, the more well-rounded person you are.
Yeah.
So you passed the bar in New York. You're in Toronto, but you passed the bar in New York years ago, right?
Yeah, back in 1977, I guess it was. It's quite a while ago.
So you had to cross the border, I'm sure. You were an immigrant yourself to do that.
I was a unique case. In fact, I was a sort of a precedent case. They had to convene the Committee on Character and Fitness and have a hearing with me to decide whether they would allow me into the bar there, because the issue was over the Commerce Clause in the Constitution of the United States and someone from outside the state coming in and becoming a lawyer in the state, an attorney in New York State. And they ruled that I had the right to do that. And as a result, I became.
Oh, that's interesting, because you ostensibly you would need the right to work in the place where you were looking for the license to do it, right?
Right, yeah. So that's how it worked out for me. But it was a touch and go. I had to actually appear in a library with, I think it was about, I don't know, it seemed like about 2,000, high profile lawyers or whoever it was that was the bar committee there. And they interviewed me with cameras and microphone and all that, and then made a decision after I left, authorizing me to become a New York lawyer.
So what did you tell the border guard when you were crossing into New York State from Ontario that you were going to?
Well, that's a story and a half. As I was going, after I got called, after they approved me for a call to the bar, I was on the way to being called in New York State. And I had a green card in my wallet from previously, but it was expired. And as I was crossing into the United States, I came as a visitor. I didn't show my green card. And the Border Patrol officer, the US Customs and Border Protection officer, didn't like what was going on, because at that time, I had a driver's license, which was a chauffeur's driver's license. And the reason I had that was because when I got my driver's license, this is a long story, but the short version is I worked for the World Congress of Free Ukrainians in New York at the United Nations, and for ZvUk, the newspaper at the UN, as a journalist. And while I was there, I wrote the New York State Bar exam. So while I was working for the World Congress, I got myself a driver's license, Manhattan driver's license. And when I passed the exam, the guy asked me, well, do you want an ordinary or do you want a chauffeur's license? And I said, what's the difference? He says, you pay $1, you get $1 more, you get a chauffeur's license. So I said, sure, okay, I'll take it. And I had that driver's license at the border when I was coming into the United States. And he thought I was driving taxis. And he was very suspicious. So he asked me, what am I going to do in the United States? I told him I'm going down to be called to the New York bar. And he said, no, you're not. You drive taxis in the United States. I can see it right here. I said, no, really honest. I'm going to be called to the bar. He said, no, you're not. I'm taking your now. He said, can I see what's in your wallet? I said, you have the right to do that? He said, yeah. So I had to pull out my wallet and he found this old green card in there. Now he was really suspicious. You know, what is this green card doing in your wallet? I said, well, it's an old green card. I wanted to ask a friend of mine who was Volodymyr Starosольsky in New York, who's an immigration lawyer. I was going to ask him, is this still valid? Can I still get this green card reenacted or renewed? And the guy says, no, I'm taking this green card and I'm not letting you in. And it was a mess. But anyway, I had to go through the embassy in Ottawa, the US embassy in Ottawa, to ultimately tell this guy, let this guy in, he's going to be called to the New York bar. And I got in.
So while you were still at the border crossing, you were able to get somebody on the phone to...
Not right away. He stopped me, blocked me, took my green card, and it took me about 3-4 days of effort to get the embassy to call the guy down at the Pearson Airport to say, okay, let this guy through. He's going to be called to the bar, because the guy didn't believe me. Wow. So anyway, that's all. That's it. That shaped my view of what I'm going to do with my life, though. Because from that day on, I decided, you know, I'm going to work in this area, and you know, maybe I'll help other people with immigration law. And here I am, 40 years later.
Yeah, it's amazing how those experiences can form your future. So obviously, we know now that what's happening in Ukraine is astonishing. I mean, to say the least, there are no words. There are reports coming in that that Putin's army and Air Force are targeting civilians as they flee violence. And there are reports that 1 million people have already crossed the border trying to get away from the war in Ukraine. You're an immigration lawyer in 2 countries. You got to know 2 sets of rules and regulations. I want to talk to you generally about what the situation is in both the United States and Canada. And
sure.
You know, since you're Canadian and since you're in Toronto, I guess we'll give your home turf home field advantage and start there.
Okay.
Tell us what's going on in Canada.
Sorry, sure. Well, let's start with a little background. Not since World War II have there been so many refugees in Europe. Like, we're talking more refugees than the refugees. Well, it looks like it's ballooning into a refugee crisis more serious than the World War II, post-World War II DP crisis that was around, that a lot of our, you know, parents, grandparents, or whatever went through. Meaning, back then, there were millions of people in DP camps back then, displaced persons camps. And they had to be sponsored to come over to North America or to Australia or Argentina or wherever you have it. Now, there's, according to the most recent estimate that I got from the UN, was 1.5 million refugees, Ukrainians, in Eastern Europe, outside of Ukraine. But I can easily see, and I wrote an article for Forbes. I write Forbes articles on immigration. Before this crisis broke out, I quoted the Minister of Foreign Affairs, I believe it was, or Defense, one or the other. I guess it was the Minister of Defense, who said that he was projecting that somewhere between 3 and 5 million people would become refugees if Ukraine was invaded. And that projection looks pretty promising in terms of what's going to happen unless the war can be stopped.
Well, we're almost more than 1/3 of the way there, and it's been a week. Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to take a link. I'm going to put a link to that article below the description of this video.
Good, good. So that's the deal. Now the question is, what are we going to do with this magnificent number of people? and how are we going to resettle them and, make something out of this? Not to mention the destabilization of Europe that it could cause. We're early in the game. Right now, the world is with us. There's a lot of goodwill. They're helping. This is a moment when we're seeing the worst of humanity, but also the best of humanity in terms of the crisis in Ukraine, the bombing and the stuff you talked about, and the best of humanity in terms of the response of Poles, Hungarians, the Baltics, all of Western Europe, not to mention the United States, Canada, and other countries, and Israel and everybody backing what's going on and helping the people in this humanitarian crisis. It's tremendous, tremendous world support for Ukraine. So that's the context. And now we got to talk in our conversation here about what can be done in terms of Ukrainian immigrants to Canada and Ukrainian immigrants to the United States. Let's start with you, Canada, as you suggested. Let me give you a little rundown. The basic approach I advocate at this moment is come to Canada as a visitor, particularly if you have a family member who can sponsor you to come as a visitor to Canada. The current rules for visitors coming to Canada are the same as they are for anybody else coming to Canada. Ukrainians are no different at this moment, other than there's been an expression of sympathy and the desire to expedite anybody who's applying for visitors visas to Canada by the government. There are some touchy points. A visitor is someone who comes to a country, but then leaves the country at the end of the period of authorized stay. And we're addressing that issue by saying, if you're a visitor to Canada, you're Ukrainian, it's likely you're coming temporarily because you want to return back to Ukraine once things stabilize. And so you're going to say, I'm coming for the time being to Canada. And because I have a family member or close associate who is going to support me while I live there for the time being until things settle, and then I will return back to Ukraine.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, if I can ask you a question about that. So I don't want to skip ahead too far, because I want to ask you, when we get to the United States, I have a feeling that you might be talking about similar routes to the United States.
It's going to be very similar to what I'm talking about.
Right. So I just want to bring up an interesting point. You're saying that the intention of the immigrant or the person traveling as a visitor to the United States or Canada, in this case, Canada, is with the intention of eventually returning home. Now, there's some policy changes that were executed by the president recently that we'll get to in the United States.
Yes.
And I want to maybe dive a little bit into that when we get there about, making sure that people know or have accurate information about how to do that.
Yeah, that's called TPS, and we're going to come to that.
Okay.
But what I'm talking about for Canada right now, this area that we're talking about right now, identical in the US. The requirements are the same, and I'll just cover them briefly for US in a moment. But so the key element is going to be this issue about, do you have intent to stay here permanently? Because if you do, you can't be a visitor. So we have to address that by saying, yeah, well, I'm coming as a visitor because it's my intention to return home. And the authorities, there's great goodwill right now in the authorities in both countries. And I think they're ready to accept a fairly reasonable request of a visit with the idea that the person is intending to go back. They're not going to go crazy on us. So now, unfortunately, in the US situation, recently there have been a few denials by US officials of people who have come and applied as visitors. But it's likely because these people did not know about this thing we're talking about right now, which is saying something about, well, I've got a life back in Ukraine. I've got a house, I've got a wife, I've got or a husband, I'm sorry, or I've got a dog, or I've got a job, or I've got whatever it is that I'm looking to return to. If you don't have any of that, then the chances of getting in could be, turned down. You could get turned down.
So they want to look as though, I mean, obviously they're doing this in good faith, but they want to show that they don't have an intention of overstaying the visa. In fact, they don't have an intention of abandoning whatever it is that they left behind.
That's a very good way of putting it. I would put it this way, like you just said, but a little, I'm going to word it the same way, but a little different. They're going to abide by the law. Whatever the law requires, they will abide by it, but they're asking to come as a visitor for the time being. Now, the key is there's got to be a family member, preferably a family member, even a distant one, a cousin, uncle, aunt, or whatever. Better if it's a father, husband, wife, son, daughter, but whatever it is, there's got to be a family member inviting them to come in, because that family member can say, look, I'll give this person a place to stay, I'll look after them, I'll provide them food and shelter, I'll look after their expenses while they're here. And that will relieve the American or the Canadian government official who's looking at the application from any apprehension about, well, this guy's going to show up and then what? Right straight on to welfare, right? They don't want that. So these are the circumstances right now, both for Canada and the US in terms of visiting. And that is the quickest way for anybody from Europe to get into Canada or the US. I recommend it.
And these are not refugees, right? This is not a visa for refugees.
Okay. The people are all refugees as we understand them in common parlance, but they're not a refugee claimant for purposes of coming to the country. Do not claim refugee status on arrival. I would advocate against that. It's complicated. It's a developing situation in terms of Ukraine. But listen, you can claim refugee status once you're inside the country as well. It's not like you're precluded from claiming refugee status. There are benefits to refugee claims that are not available to ordinary visitors. In the Canadian case, the government has agreed that if the person comes as a visitor, they will be eligible to get a work permit. So that's another reason why you should come as a visitor. But you won't get health care, which is something you would get if you're a refugee claimant, as well as a work permit if you're a refugee claimant in Canada. In the American situation, there's no right to a work permit. There's no right to any health care. If you're coming as a visitor, you got to look after yourself, buddy, or someone's got to look after you. So be it. Okay. So anyway, thank you for allowing me to sort of kind of skate over this area. But that's the key message I want to leave with people is now's the time to apply for a visitor's visa to Canada or the United States. And if you'll allow me, Dan, just give me a few more minutes. I want to explain particularly why now is the time. Even though, for example, in Canada, the Canadian government has announced that it's going to relax the restrictions on visitors coming to Canada. And in about 2 weeks or so, we're going to hear all the details about a relaxed visitor's visa option for people. But despite that fact, I think it's important both for Canada and the United States for people to apply now and not later for several reasons. Number one is the world is on our side. Right now, Ukrainians are well received anywhere. There is some criticism. There's a building backlash against Ukrainian refugees by other people who are saying, I've been in the line for 2, 3, 4, 5 years waiting. Why should these guys be able to get right through there right away? Or I'm from Palestine, we've been mistreated all this time. Why should these people get the permission to, stuff like that? And there's some, those are not unreasonable criticisms, although just the case, if I may make it for the Ukrainian side, forgive me, my phone is ringing. I'm not going to answer it.
All right.
Maybe I can put it on. Okay, there we go. Briefly, the argument for why Ukrainians are entitled now or should be treated better than, say, some of the others at the moment there's two of them. One is Ukraine is being attacked by a nuclear power after having surrendered its nuclear weapons to that power on the promise that the Russians would respect its integrity, its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and on the assurances made by the United States, the UK, and lesser but still assurances of France and China that this was in Budapest, that if Ukraine surrendered 5,000 nuclear weapons, both strategic and tactical nuclear weapons, that Ukraine's sovereignty would be respected. And now they're being crushed by that nuclear power. There's no other community of refugees who can say that. That's number one. And number two, for 75 years, Ukrainians in the United States and Canada and elsewhere were cut off from their family members in the Soviet Union, unable to sponsor any of them because of the Iron Curtain. And we were severely disadvantaged in terms of being able to bring over close relatives for that period of time. The doors were closed, not for everybody else, but for Ukrainians and other Eastern Europeans who were behind the Iron Curtain. So this is an opportunity to at least catch up a bit on that loss of 75 years worth of sponsorships of family members. And by and large, the people who are coming will have family. The initial ones will probably have family members in North America. So we're catching up. Those are two reasons why this immigration, the Ukrainian refugee immigration, should, in addition to just world sentiment, have some resonance in terms of immigration treatment at this moment.
Now, of course, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Of course, governments all have limited resources, but if there are legal paths for anyone, regardless of where they're coming from, they should take advantage of them. And there's no reason why Ukrainians shouldn't do the same, or people from Ukraine shouldn't do the same.
That's a good point. It's a good point. We're not trying to disobey the law. We're not sneaking in. You know, these Ukrainians are coming lawfully the way the rules require them to come. So, but let me just again on the timing, get this timing issue through this timing issue with you. So I mentioned the sympathy that the world has for Ukrainians now as one factor. Another factor is the longer you wait, the more there will be people applying. And the more people apply, the longer the waiting times. What was something, for example, in the Canadian case that could be done in 2 days in our initial applications are now taking like 2 weeks to get done. And this is early in the game. I anticipate long backups. For example, biometrics is one of, getting fingerprinted, and security clearance is one of the steps you have to go through in order to get into Canada or the United States. Getting an appointment to get your fingerprints done is now taking 2-3 weeks. And until you get that done, you won't get your visa. So already there's a lineup of people, and this is early in the game. And the longer we wait, and the more people pour out of Ukraine, if it's 3 to 5 million people, that backlog is going to backlog the whole works of, so now, for those reasons, is the time to apply. Even if it's more difficult, say in the Canadian case, even though 2 weeks from now, it may be easier to get a visitor's visa to Canada than today, I would say that today is a better time to apply for Ukrainians than even 2 weeks or longer from now. The sooner the better. That's for everybody. Anyway, that's the whole subject of visitors.
But the consulates or the embassies or the places where you would apply, the physical places where you would apply in Ukraine are bombed or closed. How do people apply physically?
Okay, good point. Good point. So the application, both in Canada, I'm going to treat this particular topic, together, Canada and US, because it's so similar.
Sure.
In both Canada and the US, it can be done online. In the Canadian case, you go on, you have to create your own portal, like which a lawyer can do for you, or you can do yourself. And then you upload an application with all the relevant documents. And assuming you've provided everything that's needed, including answering all the questions, your application will be approved, and the Immigration Service will advise you to make an appointment for a biometrics exam, the fingerprinting, and thereafter pick up your visa, which will be put into your passport for you to be able to travel to Canada. In the US, it's something similar. It's online. The State Department has what's called a DS-160 form that you have to fill in. That can be done online. Usually you do it applying to a specific consulate. So it might be Vienna, it might be Warsaw, it might be, Paris, London, wherever it is. And basically, it's a 20-page questionnaire that requires answers, name, address, date of birth, place of birth, all that kind of stuff. In both cases, you're going to be answering the same questions. It is very important to be as accurate and detailed as required in the questionnaires. And the questionnaires will talk about your travel history. Now let's see if I got this right. I think it's travel history since birth, since 18 years of age onward, and your work history, year by year, every job you had. And if you weren't working, then unemployed for what period of time. But you have to, these are details that these questionnaires will ask you that you have to fill in. And that's the process. In the US case, you're going to fill it in this DS-160. They require a picture. You can do a selfie if it, depending on how well you do your selfie. It'll work for Canada, and usually it'll even work for the US. Headshot of each applicant, and you have to apply for each family member. So it's the wife and the 2 kids or whatever it is, right? All 3 of them require these forms to be filled out. And the ideal is they have a passport for each person, and they have a birth certificate for the children, and possibly a marriage certificate for the wife. Those are the basics. I can't think of what else they might need, but I think those are the basic ones. Let's say you don't have them. It's possible to get the visa without even those, but you have to explain why you don't have them. Well, the war, I escaped. I didn't care about my documents. I was cared about my life as an explanation, but you have to provide an explanation.
So I want to ask you a little bit more about the visitor visa process, because we alluded to this before. We brought it up that the United States is now allowing Ukrainians who, for example, a student whose visa will be expiring, to stay in the United States so they don't have to go back to a war zone. And I believe that that will also give them the right to apply for a work permit. Is that correct?
Yeah,
so
that's called temporary protected status. And as of, I think it's March 1st, if you were might be March 2nd, I'm not sure exactly. If you were in the United States and you are a Ukrainian with a Ukrainian passport, and you were on that date in the United States and have been there since, you're eligible for what's called temporary protected status. I'm just going to give you all the details on that. There is a biometrics, meaning fingerprinting requirement. There's a form I-812 that needs to be filed. The biometrics cost $85. The form I-812 costs $50. There's a employment form I-765 that has to be filed. There's a $410 fee for that. And if you want to travel, you can even get a travel document. I-131 travel document. The names aren't so significant if you're not going to be doing it yourself as what's required. So basically the procedure will be that it's an application to a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service site where these documents are sent in and the payments. And having sent in the payments, you will get 18-month temporary protected status, TPS status, which will include the work permit. And you will be free and you won't have to worry about being in the US, extending your visa, or if your visa is expired or anything of that nature. It should help over 70,000 Ukrainians who are in the United States at this moment to solidify their status, meaning be in the US legally by applying in this way.
How long can a typical visitor visa allow a person to stay in the United States?
It's usually 6 months. So
here's what I'm thinking, and this is why I wanted to ask you. I'm glad you're here because this is what's been kind of rattling around in my head. So supposing somebody gets a visitor visa approved and they come to their uncle or father or mother or whomever they're visiting, they have that visa because their intention or their stated intention is that I'm going to go back. But if they're here, what if they apply for the temporary protective status? Then
they won't be qualified for temporary protective.
Okay. All right.
But things can change. One change that could happen is they may introduce the ability to apply for a work permit or employment authorization document, is what it's called. Or another thing they may agree to is, like, these are the current, at this moment, you can't apply for a work permit if you come in as a visitor, but they may adopt a policy to allow people to do that. Or the other thing which you can do is you can extend your visitor's stay for another 6 months by applying before that visitor's period of authorized stay expires. So a person could apply for another 6 months and so on, assuming that they came in as a visitor and they're trying to stay until things settle back home and then go home at the end of the period of authorized stay.
Now, for either the United States or Canada, if you don't know that you have no contact with any relatives, you don't know if you have any, you've never been in touch with them, and let's say you've gotten yourself to Poland, is the reasonable advice or is the preferred advice to that person stay in Europe?
No. Well, I look at it this way. You're driving down the street. You got a green light, but the next light afterwards is red. What are you going to do? Do you stop and wait for all the lights to be green before you go? Or do you take the green? I say take the green. Whatever is open to you, take it. If you can get to Canada, go to Canada. If you can get to the States, go to the United States. If you got a multiple entry B1, B2 visa for the United States, that's a visitor's visa, take it and go soon. Don't wait. Take it now. If you got something for Canada, same thing. You don't have to have a relative either in Canada or the United States to enter either country. Even someone who has no relatives, but has someone who's a friend or acquaintance or a business colleague who's willing to apply for them to write a letter of support saying, hey, this is a friend of mine. I'm inviting him to come to Canada. I'm going to offer him a place to stay, room and board, or whatever, look after his expenses while he's here. That would open the door for that person to come to Canada. If they have no relative and no friend who will write a letter supporting them, the chances of them coming to Canada or the United States are slimmer unless they can show how they're going to support themselves in the United States or Canada when they do come in. If they've got money, and let's say they can show, well, I've got $10,000 or whatever in the bank or something like that, then even then that person could come. But if they have no money and no support, chances of getting permission to come in are less. But to address your question, Dan, more directly, you're asking about choosing between Europe and Canada or the United States. That's a choice that depends on, do you have any relatives or friends there? Maybe you have a place or an occupation that will be perfect for Europe, but maybe won't be good for Canada or the United States. Or maybe the circumstances are better for you because it's closer to Ukraine and you're planning to, keep the bridge and hopefully return sooner or whatever. These are personal calculations that you have to take into account in deciding where you're going to go. Also, the circumstances being offered to you in the various countries differ. Britain has, I understand, a fairly positive, I think they introduced a 3-year visitors kind of a thing program. Poland has been very generous in what they've offered. I know that all the countries in Europe appear to be offering various forms of support. So you might want to canvass where are your best opportunities and decide, is that the best thing for you? I just want to return, though, if you'll allow me, Dan, to other options other than visitors and the issue of refugees. So can we go into that?
Please.
Okay. I've already mentioned, I don't like refugee status as an initial thing to claim for North America. I don't know about Europe. I'm not an expert on Europe, so I'm not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
The main problem with refugee status is when you come in and you say, I want to make a claim for asylum in the United States, it's called asylum in the United States, or refugee status in Canada. They'll put put in front of you a document that basically says, I hereby agree to be allowed to be deported unless I prove my refugee claim. And it's on that basis that I'm getting conditional status in the USA or in Canada. It's conditional entry. But the danger is you're agreeing that if you can't prove that refugee claim, you're out, brother. And it's very seductive because they offer you, straight into a work permit and straight in Canada, at least, into healthcare. So a lot of people think, well, like if I'm a visitor, I'm coming to the US, no work permit, no employment option, just I'm a visitor. So, the refugee claim sounds much better. But that condition is very serious because, and you may think, wow, what are you talking about? Semotiuk. They're explaining, they're running away from a war. There's a war going on. They're all refugees. All you have to say is you're Ukrainian and you're a refugee. You shouldn't be able to get a refugee claim through. No. It's purposefully defined very narrowly. For example, Syrians or others who were escaping war didn't necessarily right away get a permission to be called refugees. A refugee, by definition, the legality of it is that's a person who's A, outside their country of origin, B, has a well-founded fear of persecution, C, by their country of origin, by the government of the country of their origin, D, based on narrow criteria such as race, religion, political opinion, etc. And if the country has a part for, so let's take the case of Crimea, for example. When Crimea was invaded by the Russians, you think every Ukrainian should be able to get a refugee claim. No, because you could escape to another part of the country and claim, live in another part, a safe part of the country.
So if the Russian government is, if you qualify because under the legal terminology because of what the Russian government is doing to you, if you're Ukrainian, it doesn't count because it's not the Ukrainian government doing it to you.
Correct. That you're right on. Also, the fact that you travel through Poland to the United States or Canada could be argued against you. They could say, well, if you're a refugee, the typical refugee is someone who takes a canoe and, canoes across the Atlantic Ocean and arrives exhausted on your shore with no clothes on. Not someone who flies over and, for a visit to Canada or the United States. So they could argue, well, wait a minute, you had the chance to make a refugee claim in Poland. Why didn't you make it in Poland or Hungary or wherever you came from? And you're flying around Europe in airplanes, which some of them will be, because there's free air travel. Some Wizz Airlines, for example, is offering 100,000 free flights all over Europe.
Yeah.
So there are impediments to making the claim stick. And it's not Ukrainian as a group. That's not good enough. But if, let's say you're a gay and you're escaping, this is an example, it's not Ukraine, but it's a good example.
Sure.
If you're gay or a homosexual in Russia and you come to Canada or the United States and you claim refugee status, that's a good claim because they don't tolerate gays in Russia. That's an example of a good claim. So is your group being targeted? Now, if you're an officer in the Ukrainian army and now Russia has taken over the country, that's a good refugee claim. If you're a police officer, if you are a political leader like Zelensky and you come to the United States, that's going to be a good political refugee asylum claim. But if you're like you and me, we're just, well, lawyers are another example of someone that probably would succeed in a refugee claim. But if you're an average Joe, like we are otherwise, not so easy, not so easy. So I'm leery about claiming refugee status at the border because of, it's a trap. It's a trap. It's a last resort. But everybody thinks, oh, refugee claim right away. We're all refugees. But it's a decision of last resort. Only in the last resort would I do. Now,
that word carries a lot of legal weight, and if you put your weight on the wrong spot, the floorboards could fall from under you, I guess.
Yeah. Let me give you an example of someone that I encountered recently. I'm not going to disclose a person's name or any identity, but the person had 7 children, young children, and his wife and children were in Poland, and he was trying to get the family over to Canada. Now the problem, and his thinking was, and that was pretty good thinking actually. If I get my family over to Canada, they'll have work permits, and they claim refugee status. They'll have work permit from my wife. There were 2 women there, by the way, mother or whatever. Plus B, all my children, there were 7 children, will go to school for free, and they'll all have health care. What could be better than that? That's way better than a visitor's, visa.
Yeah.
Okay, they would have work permits, but they wouldn't have all the rest of it. So now I argued against that for that family. I said, no, that's a bad move. That's a bad move. But then later I learned, wait a minute, this guy's not just any old Joe. This guy was a major economic leader in Ukraine. And he had spoken out against the Russians before the invasion. So I changed my mind. And in that case, I said, yeah, that's a good case, refugee claim in Canada. But the problem was, how do you get over to Canada? To get over to Canada, you can't say, hey, I'm a refugee, take me to Canada. Canada's not going to pay for a ticket to Canada for 7 people, 7 kids and 3 others. You have to pay the cost of a visitor's visa. You have to come over as a visitor and then make a refugee claim. And the problem with a visitor's visa is you have to pay for all the, a visitor's visa to the United States, by the way, you have to pay for it. It's not free. You have government fees. I can't remember how much. It's probably $300 or $400. But Canada said, Ukrainians will be exempt from having to pay the fees. So some people, Ukrainians, tried to file a visitor's claim only to find out, wait a minute, it says, pay your fee. How are you going to pay your fee? So we had to photocopy the website saying it's visa free, meaning no fee, and include that in the, it says, I am exempt from paying the fee. And then what's the basis of exemption? A copy of the website saying refugees can come for free. That's how they can get them over here. But this guy had another problem. The problem was he had no money outside the country. Now, how are you going to get the, how are you going to get the family, even now that it's free to apply for the visas, to Canada? The airfares. Did he have any family in Canada or friends? None. How are you going to get him over here? He had friends in the United States. Now, he had two visas. The adults had visas, visitors' visas to the United States, but they didn't have visitors' visas to Canada. So I was arguing with them, you should go to the United States because you've got the visas. You can go on a plane right now, go, the green light's there, go. But he said, well, what about my family? What about all the kids? And so there was, now it's still in the process. This case is not resolved yet, but I'm hoping what will happen is his American friends will collect the money necessary, or he'll find the money necessary to apply for the visitors' visas to Canada and then make a refugee claim at the port of entry.
So before we conclude, I want to talk to you about avoiding scams, because I know there's, in some communities there are notary publics, or Ukrainian it's notarius. I know there's other similar analogous things in other groups, other communities. Obviously not everybody who wants to emigrate to the United States or Canada has, like you were saying, has the money to do so. There are application fees. There's all kinds of different scenarios like that. I just want to hear some tips about how do you avoid scams? Two, who do you turn to? And do you know of any organizations that are trying to help people for free?
Okay, that's a tough subject for me to cover. I have some information about that, but I'd have to dig it out. Let's see if I can dig that out. Right.
Well, what we can do is this, and maybe this will make it easier for you.
Yeah.
As far as avoiding scams go, you want to talk to a law firm, a reputable law firm with licensed attorneys, right?
Yeah.
So that's one. As far as charitable organizations or nonprofits or non-government organizations or even legal aid type things, if there are any and you want to share that information, we can add that information down at the bottom.
Oh, that'd be super. That would be really good.
Video.
I would say this, an organization like the one you belong to, Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, is a reputable organization, someone to listen to in terms of advice. The World Congress of Ukrainians is a reputable organization, worth listening to. Church leaders, priests, bishops, and so on, they're reputable. They're worth whatever the congregation, by and large. I think there are people that are worth listening to and taking advice from. Red Cross, the UN, any US government agency, any Canadian government agency, they're reputable. In terms of working with immigration consultants, beware of people who are not lawyers, but offering immigration advice. And in the case of Canada, there are immigration consultants, that's a category, that are capable of giving professional advice and are regulated by the Canadian government. In addition to immigration lawyers, they're one grade lower than an immigration lawyer because they can only give advice in immigration matters. So unlike the Americans, where there is no such thing, you have to be an immigration lawyer. In Canada, you can be an immigration consultant and still do immigration cases. Something just to know. But listen, if it's first of all, if it's a guarantee, if it's 100% guaranteed, that's like 100% guaranteed, you're going to be in trouble, don't bother. You know, there's no guarantee in immigration. It's like, if they, a lot of clients will say, you know, I'll pay the money, but is there a guarantee? I like to answer back, listen, can I guarantee that you'll be alive and I'll be alive tomorrow morning? Now, there's no guarantee in life. It's
Right.
You have to be leery of people who offer you extraordinary results and want high fees. And, you know,
If it's
Google
too good to be
people.
true, it probably is.
Google people. Do not pay anyone without Googling their name first and finding out who are they.
Well, I can tell my viewers that in Illinois, for example, the Illinois bar, or the board that the body that governs licenses in Illinois, has a website. I can add that here. I'm sure that other jurisdictions have it too, and you can put in a practitioner's name and it'll tell you, are they licensed, do they have insurance, and so forth. So if you need to research someone, I guess you can. And there's Google, there are other resources too, to make sure you're looking at the official source material to know that you're talking with a lawyer who's got a license and who's the real deal. Well, Andy, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me on this topic. I hope we can stay in touch, and if there are any new developments, we can convene again.
Great. Just want to share my email address at info@paceimmigration.com, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Українське незалежне радіо.